Hello and welcome to this impromptu stream. I was hemming and hawing about it this afternoon, and finally I decided, why not? Why not go ahead and have a chat about what's going on in Germany and the wider implications, if any. So I'm joined by Blackbird9. So, Blackbird, how are you?
Greetings, good sir. Happy Sunday. Thanks for having me on.
You're welcome. You're welcome. I'll very quickly say that in the last few days on Twitter, I've seen a number of video clips from Germany, and they relate to German people singing a song. And this has caused outrage with the German government. How dare German people sing a song? And in the song, there are lyrics, and the lyrics pertain to the following: Ausländer raus, which means foreigners out, but it sounds so much nicer in the German tongue. And I was actually thinking of it as well, because I know a lot of people from other European countries have latched on to this slogan, and I think it probably seems exotic to them, Ausländer raus. But when you think about it, it's very logical in that aus in German is out. So it really means outsiders, those who are out, who are, not from the land, should be out of the land. So yeah, it's interesting. So Blackbird, what do you make of this? Is it just a craze that will die down, in the next 24 hours? Or do you think the German people, the young German people in particular, are just fed up of their country being turned into a third world hellhole?
Yeah, this is, fascinating for me as somebody who has been trying to expose this Kalergi plan, Cloward Piven plan agenda for decades now. To see the shift in the Overton window, especially among the youth. And for those not familiar with the Overton window idea, it's basically, where your worldview is in relation to your community, the people around you. And at the middle is policy, where it's just matter of fact, everybody knows this. And then you have the popular opinion, and then the sensible opinion, and then acceptable. It may be pushing the social norms a little bit, but it's still acceptable. Then you have the radical. It's like, oh, that's just outside. And then the unthinkable. And one of the things that we're seeing is the youth. They see the reality. They are having to go to these public government schools in this, diversity environment, and they see the reality versus the propaganda, this idea of, oh, we have to welcome the refugees. We have to welcome the stranger. If you're a good person, you will let these strangers into your community and aid them because where they came from, it was really bad. And so you have all of this propaganda that was very well crafted, explaining why every white nation on the planet had to suddenly become multicultural after World War II. You could not have white homogeneous society anymore. And it's like, why did this all of a sudden happen in every white nation at the same time? Then you realize it was the same people behind it, that this was part of an agenda, and it is a genocide agenda. They want to destroy Western civilization. They want to destroy white homogeneous society so they can replace it with their New World Order, which is basically this idea that the Jews should rule the entire world and all the nations have to be destroyed and basically reduced to Zionist client states. So this is kind of like the way the Soviet Union was blocked out, and they want this for the entire world. And despite this, million dollar, billion dollar, propaganda engine that they have to try to convince people of this, that they will stand down and let their countries be overridden by, or overrun, I should say, by these invaders, uh, we're finally hitting this breaking point, it seems, and a lot to thanks to the internet. But to see this song, Ausländer raus, so popular and everybody dancing to it. You just see this rejuvenation of the identity of people saying, no, this is our land, this is our culture, and it is worth preserving. And I think this is what is really bothering the social engineers that have spent so much time, multi generational efforts on this project, and now they're getting this massive pushback, and you see it especially in Germany, but you're also seeing it in Ireland. You're seeing it in the United States, especially here in the Southeast. Because here in the southern states of the United States, especially, we realize that we are under attack, that they are just flooding our borders with all of these illegals that do not want to come here, do not want to assimilate. They want to basically come for the free stuff. They've been told that, the white nations are just cake and ice cream and we'll give you free money. And it's mainly young military age men coming across. You don't see refugees. You're not seeing women with children. You're not seeing the elderly. You're seeing these fighting age men coming across the border and getting bussed into every rural and urban center in the countries. And so it's wonderful to see people waking up to this and pushing back. So it's just kind of a introduction, I guess, of the overview of what I see happening. So back to you.
Yeah, it seems to have come out of nowhere. Like I just don't expect much from the German folk, and that's because out of all the European peoples, the Germans have, they've been conditioned for decades and decades to be the whipping boys of the world.
Exactly, that denazification, and it's very much like the Southerners in the United States. We were conditioned about the Reconstruction after our uncivil war, that white people are bad, especially white Southerners, and that has to be destroyed. So we were brought up in this culture of shame that a white Southern man was responsible for every ill in the world, second only to those horrible Germans, right? That was the thing. It's like, ooh, Nazi Germany was the worst thing that ever happened. And that's what we were conditioned with from education, the media, Hollywood, etc. And people are realizing that no, our ancestors weren't bad. And the Germans, we now see what Germany was up against in the 1920s after the Treaty of Versailles, and just how it was designed to destroy the people. And it's like the Theodor Kaufman book, Germany Must Perish. These Zionists, whatever you want to call them, that want to rule the world, they wanted those best of the Gentiles destroyed. And that was the German people. That was the southern United States stock, that Celtic, Scot-Irish, English stock from Europe. That these are the people that stand opposed to being the slaves that they want us to be, the demoralized slaves. And you see the Germans, and I used to do a lot of training for Germans back before I got blacklisted, and the conditioning was so absolute that when my German students would raise their hand to ask a question, they always made a point to just do like two fingers. They would never have an open hand when they would raise their hand to ask a question. And that's because that was like a Hitler salute. You can't have a Roman salute. That's a bad thing. So I'm going to intentionally, do my fingers so I'm not going to offend anybody. And that was the way the Germans were. And it was always fascinating when I would have Israeli students and German students in the same classes. I was doing international communications, and just how horrible the Israelis would be to the German students, and the German students would just, oh yes, that's a good joke, and it's, there was nothing funny about how they were treated. It was like it was utter contempt, and I would have to calm down my class, sometimes because the Israelis would just get so mean to the German students, and just always, talking, always bringing up the Holocaust and always bringing up Nazis, just to demoralize the Germans further. So every chance they would get, they would put the Germans down. And the Germans were conditioned that, oh, I've got to take it because my ancestors were so bad. They did horrible things. And I've got to have the guilt for that and the shame for that. And one of my favorite truth advocates out there are, those darn Schaefer kids, Monica and Alfred Schaefer. And Miss Monica did this wonderful video several years ago called Sorry, Mom, I Was Wrong About the Holocaust, talking about this conditioning of the German youth that, they were just told their parents were the worst things ever. And so you had these German children growing up to despise their parents because they had been told by these trainers, educators, that their parents and ancestors were just horrible. And it was biological that, Europeans are just inflicted with irrational anti-Semitism from birth. It's biological, and the Germans are the worst of the worst. And this is, the mindset of these conditioners that are programming our youth in the name of education. And here in North Kakalaki, North Carolina, we have a university here in the mountains called Appalachian State University. And I went to, as what was supposedly a symposium on the Holocaust that's, being sponsored during a summer session. And that these people that were going to be teachers of children were being taught by these handlers that it's just a matter of fact that Europeans are genetically born with irrational anti-Semitism. Then there's no cure for it. They just have to be eradicated. This is being taught, on a college campus. And I'm just like, this is insane. And of course, everybody's, oh yes, it's irrational anti-Semitism. It's a disease that they're infected with. And so how do you get past that type of mental conditioning? And it's just wonderful to see groups like the ADL in a panic now because they are losing the youth. The youth is not falling for all of these propaganda tricks like their parents and their grandparents did. And one of the things that was leaked recently from the ADL was Jonathan Nosferatu Greenblatt in a panic in this conference call saying, the numbers are in and it's not a left-right problem, it's an age problem. Anybody under the age of 30 now is not buying into our big lies anymore, and they're actually starting to organize, and this is the threat to the Jewish people, as he puts it, right? So it's very fascinating to see this shift, like I said, in the Overton window. And the question is, what is going to be the reaction from the powers that should not be about this? And so I'm just very curious to see how this is going to play out. So back to you.
I remember when the Confederates flag, certainly here in Ireland, and I would say in Europe in general, it wasn't considered problematic. It was only a few years ago that people started saying that it was a sign of hatred. So it became aligned with the swastika, more or less. I think there was some Gaelic football or hurling match in Ireland. I remember reading an article, and I don't know, was it someone had come in, like back in the day when Cork was playing, they used to bring in all sorts of different flags They would bring in Canadian flags and the Confederates flag, etc. And yeah, it was. I don't know, was it stopped or was the person told to take the flag down? So yeah, growing up, I remember on TV there were reruns of the Dukes of Hazzard, and they had that car with the Confederates flag. So yeah, but getting back to the Germans, these young Germans, they've been born in original sin, and that's the sin of the history book. And like, I've watched so many documentaries, I wouldn't watch them now because they paint a certain narrative that seems to be full of errors. Let's just say that much as time goes by. But yeah, they're documentaries, and you can see the war has finished, and the Americans, the British, the Russians, they're getting these queues of Germans, men, women, and children, to queue up and to look at lampshades.
And the shrunken heads.
Shrunken heads, and bars of soap. Bars of soap. Now, we didn't have, as far as I know, at the time, it was difficult to analyze these items, but they were analyzed, and they were all absolute fakes. But I never heard an apology. I never heard an apology for those who spun that narrative. I didn't hear those people getting their comeuppance. Those who put out these horrendous lies, lampshades, bars of soap, never heard anything. But yeah, the Germans were told that this is what their people did, and you could see the women bawling their eyes out. Oh my God, we must be the worst people in the world. This is what we do to people. We turn them into lampshades and bars of soap. But how does that, as you said, Blackbird, how does that fare with the young German people? Because, in their cities, in many of the German cities now, German young people in that demographic, let's say from the ages of 10 to 30, Germans are a minority. So how does this whole original sin from World War II, how does it work on them? And I think it's, as you said, I think it's wearing off. It's wearing thin. But yeah, the Germans, since 1945, you read reports about starvation, like that. Was it 1 or 2 million German soldiers were starved? They were in an open-air prison. We never hear about that. They were intentionally starved. Many of them were sent off then to Siberia, and they got back maybe 15 years later, 20 years later. We hear of all the German women who were raped when the Soviets were coming in. And I heard a German guy once saying that when he was in school, I think this was in the 1970s, they were given a project, and the project was to go home and ask your parents and your grandparents what they did during the war. What were they up to during the war exactly? We want to know. We want to know what your parents and your grandparents were doing during the war. Were they doing Nazi stuff, or were they trying to help the poor eternal victims? And I was rereading. I'm rereading it now, but earlier today I came on the part of 1984 where you've got this character, and he's an idiot more or less, and he believes everything he's told by Big Brother. He loves the party. He's always sweating because he's always working so hard. He goes to every single meeting, everything. And it turns out that he ends up in a prison cell in the Ministry of Love, which in reality is the Ministry of Torture. And when the protagonist Winston asks him, "How the hell did you end up here?" he says that it was his own fault. He didn't know, but he must have had wrong think or whatever, because he fell asleep one night, and in his sleep he sat down with Big Brother, and his 7-year-old daughter was listening through the keyhole, and the next day she reported him. And this character, he was delighted. He was so proud of his daughter that she'd reported him. But yeah, anyway, I'll put it back to you. Is there anything you want to add to that, or do you want to bring this conversation in another way? I have some more notes jotted down, so I think we'll be okay for 15 minutes or so.
But that's so spot on to the Marxist model of destroying the family unit. When you look at their 10-point objectives, Destroying the nations, destroying the church, and destroying the nuclear family are the big three. That they want complete control of all information, they want complete control of all currency, and they have to destroy the family unit. And the way to do that is to turn the children against their parents by telling the children their parents are bad people. And there's nothing the parents know that's worth learning. And everything about your family unit is wrong. And we see that playing out in this education model of wokeness, and especially one of the things about this school here, it's a taxpayer funded public university, Appalachian State University, and they provide the majority of the teachers for all of the Southeast public schools. And the curriculum, that's mandatory diversity classes. And you basically, if you're a white Christian a Southern person, you basically have to go through a humiliation ritual semester of taking the mandatory diversity class where you get to basically say, yes, white people are bad. They're responsible for slavery. They're responsible for every bad thing that ever happened. And people of color are naturally superior. And of course, the Jews are just the natural superior people to everyone, and you can never criticize them. And you have to get past this humiliation ritual class before you can even start to pursue your higher learning, right? And they give each other awards for how great they're doing because they're bringing all this diversity and inclusivity and equity to the school systems throughout the backward South and undoing all that bad programming that the children learn from the families, right? And so I just think that is key. And what he was, George Orwell was talking about in 1984 is, the children become spies and reporting to their teachers, of what their parents are doing, so that the teachers can then report to the various, intelligence agencies that we have a problem in the community. And next thing you know, the child is being taken by social services or put on psychoactive drugs, etc. And this is just part of their model, and it's it's a very wicked model. But they just think the state should be in charge of raising the children, not the parents, not the family. And Brave New World, remember, father and mother are vulgar words. That a mother, that's a bad thing, because they're now using artificial birth chambers instead of having a biological birth. They were doing everything in incubators then. So this idea of just demonizing the family is key to their success, and to make the people hate themselves. That's the big thing. It's the self-loathing, the shame, and the guilt. If they can break a child by instilling guilt and shame with them, they control that child forever. And that's what they're trying to do. And the whole time, they're claiming the moral, ethical, and intellectual high ground that aren't we great people because we're educating children, and we're making over $500,000 a year doing this. It's amazing what these college professors are being paid to break these children, these young people, and it's criminal. And I hope that at some point that these people will be dragged into a court of law and made to pay for what they have done, the damage. But they're so full of themselves. I mean, the hubris of these professors that are just in this little echo chamber. It's insane, the chutzpah and the hubris, and there's no talking to them. It's like the NPC characters, the non-player characters. All they know is their script, and the second they hear you go off the script, they immediately tag you as not of the body. You are the enemy, and they will attack you, shut you down, try to destroy you because you're not echoing what they're echoing. So anyway, back to you.
The funny thing about Big Brother is, as you said, they don't like the words mother or father, and yet the party will use the word brother. And it said, like Orwell, he writes in this when he's he's introducing excerpts from this book, which was published by Big Brother. But Winston thinks he's reading this rebellious treatise or whatever. And, it says in it that they have to create a world of hypocrisy, a world of opposites. So, for example, as I said, the ministry of love is really the ministry of torture. The ministry of plenty is really the ministry of scarcity. And they want people to be dirt poor, especially the proles. And the other one, what was it? The ministry of... it'll come back to me anyway. So, when you think of what's happening now, for example, in Ireland, you have, I don't know if it's still the case, but the Minister for Children a couple of years ago was an American lesbian. Fast forward to now, as far as I know, the Minister for Children is a homosexual. The leader of your country will be an Indian, not Irish, for example, or half Irish. Best case scenario. Look at what's happening over in Britain. The mayors of cities, they're not British. The Prime Minister, I don't consider that person British. So they introduce these opposites, these things that are full of hypocrisy, and seemingly there's a method in the madness. Getting back to the German situation, the videos I've seen, one was a group of young Germans. I think they were on holidays and they were singing the song. I saw today a bus was driving through a city and all the people on the bus were singing it and they were shouting out the windows. And it seems like they're going a bit crazy with this song. And although I find it adorable is the word I'd use, I also find it pathetic that this is what they've been reduced to. This is how they express the idea of their country being taken out from beneath their feet. Singing a song. And they're not even allowed to sing that song. That's the thing. The people who, I think some people have been doxxed for singing that song. And I saw people saying on Twitter that, they'll dox these young German people for singing a song. But when some Afghan murders a number of people or rapes a number of people, the government will protect his identity, because it's very important to protect his identity, to keep him safe. But when a German young person sings a song, their career is over in Germany, more or less. They've been outed. So yeah, it's an interesting thing. Now, I was wondering, where's this coming from? And I was trying to consider why this has come to the fore. And I think the young Germans, they realize they don't really have much of a future. They're going to be slaving away, paying very high taxes, and a lot of those taxes will go to millions of migrants who, from morning, from, I would say midday, I won't say morning, from midday till about midnight, they just hang around the plazas, the squares of German cities and German towns. They're not working. They're sitting outside kebab shops. And there are so many of them. And I think young German people, they don't feel safe in their country, obviously. But they also feel that, they're not getting a fair whack in their country. They're working, but working for what? They're hardly going to build a great German nation. So I think slowly but surely they're starting to see that the surplus generated from their hard work is being thrown away, so that the Germans themselves will be not even a minority. They will disappear within a few decades. Is there anything you'd like to add to that, Blackbird?
Well, you're spot on with the idea that every white nation, the white indigenous population, is suddenly realizing that they have been pushed out, that their leadership no longer represents them. And when I came back home after 9/11, back to my mountains, and can't find it anywhere because I'm now a stranger in a strange land that used to be my home, surrounded by hostile invaders that are being protected by the power system. That, I can't have a voice, I can't speak my mind, but, a Jew coming in or a Muslim coming in or whatever coming in, they are completely protected. They're a protected class. You can't, in the town of Boone now, you can't even ask somebody where they're from. You can't ask them about their hairstyle. That is against the law now. And it's just to basically emasculate the white heritage population to make them feel a sense of learned helplessness, that you have no institutional power anymore. You have been replaced. And you're thinking about the UK and Ireland. It's no accident that suddenly you have all these homosexuals and people of color in leadership roles in all of these formerly white countries. And same thing here, even in the rural areas, they have come in with bags of money and said, okay, we're going to get rid of all the old leadership and replace it with our diversity puppets. And that's what they have done. They've completely stacked the elections at every level. And this is the power of the purse. And this is, fourth generation, fifth generation warfare is we're going to come in and just destroy everything, but we're going to do it legally, by the letter of the law. And if you try to react to it, you will be breaking the law. And so where does this idea of opposites come from? And I always tell people, go back and research Zabbatai Zevi. In 1666 AD, Zabbatai Zevi, he was this hardcore Zionist, Jewish supremacist, black magician who decided that we've got to radicalize the Jews and we're going to take back Israel. We're going to, this is what we're going to do. And then we're going to destroy every nation in our revenge for what they did in 70 AD when they destroyed the temple at Jerusalem, right? So everybody's got to blame for that war in 70 AD, right? So everybody becomes the Romans. All of a sudden, we're all Amalek, and they're completely justified in their revenge. And Zabbatai Zevi reasoned that evil is more powerful than good. And if you're doing evil in pursuit of a noble purpose, like the restoring the Jews to Israel, then anything you do is justified. So the ends justified the means. And he looked at the Kabbalistic nature of things. And he says, okay, if the 10 Commandments say do this, you do the opposite. So if it says do not kill, you kill. If it says do not bear false witness, you bear false witness. And and if it says do not steal, you steal like a bandit, right? And this is how the Jews are going to win the world and win their kingdom. And so that Kabbalistic opposite, you just see that thread of everything Zabbatai Zevi was talking about flow through people like Jacob Frank and Rothschild and the Illuminati and the Bolsheviks, the Cheka, the Frankfurt School, and modern day ADL. It's all there. It's like you just take the opposite and then destroy anybody who tries to correct you. And this is the way they play it. And it's crazy making, as it's supposed to be, because you're trying to follow a set of rules and you realize your adversary is not playing by those rules. But if you call them out, somehow you're the bad guy. You're the anti-Semite. You're the hater because you're calling out your adversary's double standards. So definitely for the newbies, check out the weird history of Zabbatai Zevi, and who declared himself the Jewish Messiah that was going to lead the Jews back to Israel. And pretty much everything that he said has been played out just like in the protocols. The protocols of Zion. They mapped out how they were going to do this, and this is where we're living, and it is a war to destroy all white nations and bring them to their knees before the royalty of greater Israel and world Zionism. So back to you.
I've met many Germans over the years, and if I were to describe the general personality of a German, it's of that child when you were a child and you were, let's say, you were visiting their house and you went to the playroom and there were a few of you there and you took down whatever toys you wanted to play with. Perhaps you took down some books from the bookshelves. And for an hour, maybe 2 hours, you played around. And then it was time to go home. And the German child would say, no, 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 no. You must put everything back exactly where you got it. They will stand, they will block you. You won't be able to go out through the doorway. They'll have their arms folded and they'll say, no, no, that goes there and that thing there, that goes over there and that goes there. And the books have to be put back on the bookshelf in the correct alphabetical order. And that's what I think of when I think of the Germans. They're very, strict people in general. They like systems. They especially like when their systems work effectively and efficiently. And that's why I was so surprised when I was in Germany just for a few days back at the end of 2015, and I saw hundreds of thousands of Arabs and Afghans entering the country, traveling across the country. Everything was paid for. They didn't have to buy bus tickets. They just showed some sort of code and it was given to them. They had houses to go to. They had accommodation. Everything was set up. Because if you remember, Merkel said, anyone can come. Anyone can come. The doors are open. And I was looking at this and I was thinking, this isn't going to work because these people coming in, they don't really care too much about systems. They don't care about being tidy, being efficient. This isn't going to work out. There's going to be a clash of cultures here, a massive clash of cultures. And I think we're starting to see that now. As I say, this might come to nothing. It might just be a shot in the dark, but it is a positive sign to see young Germans becoming proud of their nation and wanting it to be German again. I'll pass it back to you, Blackbird.
And that is spot on about the German people as a very orderly, logical, rational people. And one of my favorite pieces of history is during World War II in the middle of North Carolina, outside of the state capital of Raleigh, there's a little town called Hot Springs. And it was used as a POW camp for the Germans during the war. And what the Germans did was built a complete German village out of basically trash that they could acquire. And they built this perfect little orderly German village inside a POW camp. And of course, you never will hear about this, right? But this is the type of people that they could make do with anything and make something wonderful out of it. And that is why that spirit of the German had to be crushed. Germany must perish, as Theodor Kaufmann said, because that can never be conditioned to be a slave. It's kind of like the Slavs. Chabad Lubavitch talks about how the Slavs in Ukraine could never be conquered, so you have to destroy them. They could never make the Germans into slaves, just like they could never make the Southerners in the United States into slaves, so they have to destroy them. And this is, the psychological warfare of it is, get hold of the children and destroy the children, turn them against the parents. And this is how we will break this people. And then we will just flood their countries with the third world. And you will get the Kalergi plan, low IQ, brown skinned people, no more white people, that the Jews want as part of their New World Order. And they talk in the 1920s when Kalergi was planning all this out, being funded by Rothschild. This is how we're going to destroy all these nations, by flooding them under the premise of humanitarianism, that, oh, we're going to bring in these poor people from these other countries, and you don't want to be racist, do you? Because racism's bad. So basically, if you had that many people as an invading army, you would have rows and rows of people standing against it to block them from coming in. But if you say they're refugees and they're being brought in by these philanthropy organizations because they're looking for a better life, et cetera, then everybody stands down. And this was the diabolical strategy is, in Rules for Radicals, he talks about, Saul Alinsky, Rules for Radicals, he talks about make your enemy live up to their own book of rules. And that idea of Christian charity, Jews love to hold that up to make it look like Christians are hypocrites if they don't just lay down and die. Right? It's, oh, you don't want to be stingy. You don't want to be selfish. These people are in need. Aren't you Christians supposed to help people in need? And that's the mind game they play on people, that if you don't allow this invasion to happen, you're somehow a bad person, that you're racist, you're bigoted, etc. You're a Nazi. And so that shaming, and you amplify that shaming with the corrupt media. You think, the second some leader says anything remotely to do with German identity or Southern identity or Irish identity, the heritage identity, they are immediately pounced by the media and brought to their knees, that we're just going to sit here and keep hammering on you until we break you. And that's another one of Saul Alinsky's rules, is pick the target and just go at it and never let up the pressure. And because people break faster than institutions do. And so this is their method, and it's very, very effective. I mean, I was on the receiving end when I was coming out for 9/11 Truth and exposing the illegal electronic surveillance that the NSA and the telecommunication companies were doing. And as soon as I stepped out into the ring, I never realized what a horrible, horrible person I was until I got to read about it in the newspapers, that this, horrible white supremacist with his crazy conspiracy theories, otherwise known as facts, and evidence, because I was backstage, this is the proof, that is, they just want to completely slander you and break you and turn everybody against you. And it's very, very effective, I don't get invited to Christmas, for example, because I have brought shame and dishonor on whole family, so my, right thinking family, doesn't want to have, they're surviving. My parents, were different, but my siblings, it's like, oh, he just threw away a perfectly good career and went off the crazy train with this conspiracy theory stuff. That's, how I'm portrayed, by my family unit, because they have been so conditioned by the media that, you have to go along with that or else they'll come after you. And so that's, the reality of how this Marxist system works. And it's very effective, but it's losing its effectiveness because people are learning the tricks. And it's kind of like when you go to see a stage magician and he's fooling you and you feel stupid. And then you study and you study and you finally figure out how the trick is done. And then you're not fooled anymore. And then you can show other people how they're being deceived by the trick. And this gets back to, the cognitive dissonance and the Overton window of it's easier to fool people than to convince them they've been fooled. Once somebody believes something because they've been told it from a trusted source like the television, the cable news channels. It's, oh, this must be true. If it's on TV, it's got to be true. Then they're going to put that in. And if it has anything to do with emotionalism, like 9/11, that was trauma-based programming. Here's a big lie, here's a bunch of emotion to completely hard write that in your psyche. And you're going to hold on to that no matter how much information to the contrary is presented to you, because you want to be a good person. And good people think this way, and any of that other stuff is what bad people think. And so that's why, Mark Twain always said it's easier to fool somebody than to convince them that they have been fooled. And this is what we're up against, is trying to convince, generations of people that, you're being taken advantage of. You're being targeted. And so the older generation, they're not going to believe it, because it's like everybody knows the Holocaust happened. The boomers are the worst. Boomer generation is the worst for believing the Holocaust lies. But the youth, this new generation, they're seeing through the lies. And a lot of that's thanks to the internet, that they're getting different information, and it's not as emotionally bonded to them, because time, it's been a lot of years since World War II. So that big emotional push isn't there like it was originally. So it's not as hard written in their psyches. And so they're able to challenge the narratives. And this is what we're seeing playing out, is they are out there challenging it. And unfortunately, they're realizing that the system is working against them. They've got the truth. So why are our leaders trying to destroy them for telling the truth? And I think that's where we are now with our youth, is trying to figure out why all the leadership is working against them when they're just trying to bring out the truth. So back to you.
Yeah, the idea of the Germans being different, very different from other European peoples, it's well known. And I remember in Russian literature coming across two parts. One was, I don't know, was it by Tolstoy or Chekhov, but the characters, they were talking about something, and the engineer, maybe the doctor, in a lot of Russian towns, this is in the 1800s, would be Germans. And I remember one of the Russians said to the other, oh, the Germans, he said, the Germans are like willow trees. You could just plant them anywhere and they'll thrive, they'll do well, because of their hard work ethic and all that. And I'm trying to think, there was another one. It was, Solzhenitsyn. He wrote a book called, I think it's called August 1914. And it's when the Tsar's troops are entering, I think it's East Prussia. And it's very, very creepy, because it's from the perspective of the Russian soldiers. And they're entering these German towns, and they're expecting to meet the German troops. But all the Germans have left the towns, so they're like ghost towns. But as they're going through these villages, the Russians can't believe how orderly everything is. You've got these square gardens, perfect square gardens. The hedges have been trimmed immaculately. The sheds are just like houses. They're almost like houses. Walking into one of these sheds, one of these barns, and you've got the hay. It has already been harvested. Everything, whatever. And the Russians, they start saying, "My God, these people are incredible." And it's the fact that they don't meet the Germans that they start to fear them even more, because they can see, just from simple German villages, what the Germans are capable of doing. Now, I'll mention a few other things. I would say to the people here in the live chat, at the moment we have 18, it went up to 20 something there at some stage. I would just say to you, if you have any questions for Blackbird, we can probably go for another 10 minutes, depending on your questions. If not, we'll finish up in about 4 minutes or so. Before I pass it back to Blackbird, I'll just say, yeah, he mentioned Ireland. Now, when I lived in Ireland many years ago, I remember there were Roma gypsies. They arrived in Ireland around 1999, 2000, give or take. Before then, you'd never see them. Well, I never saw them. And, in the early, whatever, in the noughties, you would see them. The women would be begging, and they would generally have an infant on their lap, or sucking at the breast, and they'd be sitting in doorways begging for money. And then in the evening time, the men would turn up in cars, nice cars, and they would grab the women and they would shake them down to get the money off them, and then they would whatever go off. And the numbers were growing at that time. Now, anytime on Twitter when I see videos from Dublin, it's as if everyone, it's as if 70 or 80% of the people at any given time in Dublin city centre are now Roma gypsies, and they're just hanging around all day. And this is how quickly things can change. And I can just imagine, the Irish people commuting for hours to get into Dublin, because that's where the work is, and walking through these hordes of people who are not working, and working a full day and then commuting all the way back home, maybe 2 hours commute back home, 4 hours commuting every day, 20 hours a week commuting, and then you've got your job on top of that, 40 something hours. And you must be scratching your head, asking, what's it all for? What's it all for when day by day, week by week, month by month, year by year, your city, the capital city of your country, turns into a shanty town? And we've spoken about this on previous videos about the tent cities that are now emerging. It's hard to think that this is a first world country. A country with a very long culture and history and all the rest. So to conclude, and I'll pass it over to Blackbird, and then I'll go through any questions that are in the live chat for Blackbird. I will conclude by saying that the very idea that young German, men and women, boys and girls, can have their lives destroyed for singing a song tells us how serious things are. There was a time when other European peoples could say, well, at least we're not Germans, at least we're not speaking German. The Germans, all the blame is on their shoulders. And yet the grinding machine never stopped. And it started to incorporate other enemies, the British, the Polish, the French, the Irish, the Spaniards. God only knows. It's been extended, and as Blackbird said, it's not an ethnical thing now. Whatever. It's a racial thing. There is a war on you because of the color of your skin, and the color of your skin represents the greatness from the past, and they want to snuff that out. So I'll pass it on to Blackbird, and then I'll go through any questions.
Oh, spot on. And this is the thing I had to come to grips with, because I was one of those victims of the Marxist programming as one of those far right bell curve kids in schools. You test well and suddenly you get sent to special classes, right? And all these honor programs, and you realize all those honor programs were basically designed and staffed by Jews and people of color to demonize white culture and make you, be a self-hating white person, right? And I was always tell people, before 9/11, I was probably the biggest libtard to ever come out of North Kakalaki, that I believed all the kumbaya rainbow nation things, that we're all the same. It's just cosmetic differences of our skin color, but we're actually all the same, and nothing could be further from the truth. And you think our ancestors knew this. Why did suddenly, after World War II, the common knowledge become this idea that all races are equal, when for all of history it was known that that is completely wrong, that all races are very different. They are race realities. And this is what I had to finally come to grips with is race realism, and realize that I am a targeted individual because I am a straight white person, especially from the US South. So that's something that has to be destroyed. And so you realize that you are in an existential battle. These people want you gone. They want your entire country gone. They want your culture gone because they want to replace it with something different that they control. And so this is what we're up against. And like I tell, on my shows is, white people just need to get their head in the game. If we could get a significant percentage of white people worldwide working together against this, we would nip it in the bud quite quickly. But the problem is, how do you get people to stand up when they're afraid that they're going to be doxxed, they're going to lose everything? You try to explain to them like Schultz and Nietzsche, if we don't stand up to them now, we're all going to go to the gulags. If we'd only stand, it was one of Schultz and Nietzsche's biggest regrets is they didn't stand up to this Cheka bands, because those Cheka groups in reality were very small bands. It's just they would pick out individuals, come in the middle of the night, and everyone was too afraid to stand up to them because they were afraid they would get in trouble. Right? So this is the idea is we have to stand up to this system and we have to fight smart. And one of the big things is just turn off the money, expose these NGO groups and all the federal and philanthropy money that is funding them, shut the valve off, and you shut off the inclination or the impetus for them to come here. If they're not going to get free money and free food and free shelter, why would they come here? So, shut down all the benefits and start shipping them back. And this is what we have to do. And I see, this push of the youth that they are behind this idea of reclaiming their heritage lands. And this is what we have to do. And one of the big things is to get these Zionist Jews out of positions of power, out of education and out of media and out of banking. And it's just like, gee, where have we heard that before? Maybe from the Germans that tried to warn us about this after World War I, where they said, this is the problem. They want us destroyed. And the problem is very few people in America spoke German. And so they would show clips of, Adolf Hitler making a speech, and it would sound big and scary, and they would never subtitle it. So you had no idea what they were saying. And the Jewish newscaster would say, oh, he wants to rule the world and kill everybody, right? And nothing could have been further from the truth. And one of the things I love about AI now is the ability to listen to all of these great speeches throughout history in your native language, so you understand what they're actually saying, and it suddenly makes sense. And a lot of people are going back and listening to those 1930 speeches by people like Adolf Hitler, Henry Ford in the 20s. The list goes on and on. All these people that tried to warn us, but they were shouted down. And so going back and saying they tried to warn us, these are the key places we need to focus on, fight smart, and then we will win. So back to you.
The optics when it comes to Adolf Hitler, I would say from a foreigner's perspective, in my case, an Irishman, watching old videos of Hitler, you grew up and you heard so much about this guy. You heard he was the most evil man who ever walked the earth. And then you watch videos of his speeches, and he doesn't look like a nice person. He's shouting, he's screeching, and his body language, I don't know, he looks like a frustrated actor. But as you say, it's now that people are able to find out what he was really saying. And I watched, a few years ago, I watched some clips of Hitler with subtitles, and one of them was about the role of women, and I agreed completely with him. And he said it in a very calm and measured way. Women are so important. Without them, civilization can't continue, and we need to look after our women, and we must try not to force them out to work for these big capitalistic companies, this type of thing. So there was a lot of sense in what he was saying. And there was something else I was going to say to you, and we're finishing up now. Yeah, race realism, like that is a difficult pill to swallow. It's easier to think that we're all the same. We all have the same capabilities, that all races in the world can, create great works of art, like in ancient Rome or ancient Greece, whatever, the Renaissance. It's an architecture. They can all build wonderful things. They can all compose classical music. Whatever we do have, it's a nice idea. It's an airy fairy idea, but it's a nice idea, and it is a very difficult pill to swallow when you realize that that is not how the world works. That's not how nature works. That we have evolved over eons in different ways. Some humans are very good at running. They're fantastic sprinters. Fantastic sprinters. You've got other races who, can invent things like the wheel, So I would say the races are different. And this, I think in the United States, I can ask you, Blackbird, because in Europe, we're behind the USA. You've had different races in your country for centuries. You've had, I don't know, how many generations have you had now? Maybe 4 generations where, African Americans were given completely equal status and whatever. But it doesn't seem to be working out, because wherever, I think it was there a place called, was it Ferguson or was it somewhere else? It was a predominantly black city, and they started having problems with the water. The water started turning brown because it was, they weren't looking after the water supply, something like that. Maybe it wasn't Ferguson, it was somewhere else. But yeah, we're seeing this, and Europeans are starting to see it, because, until 20 years ago, in the case of Ireland, we all we had to go by were Hollywood movies. And in Hollywood movies, these are better than Europeans. They're calmer than Europeans. They're more intelligent than Europeans. But now we have these people living amongst us, and I can see on a daily basis that it's not working out. They're having problems doing the simplest things we take for granted. And it's becoming common knowledge that you can't have this peaceful society when you've got different races looking out for their own, which is perfectly natural to look out for your own. Right, Blackbird, back to you, and I leave you with the final word. I'll just see if no questions have come up. I don't think any questions have come up. I'll scroll back up anyway. But yeah, I'll leave you with the final word. Go ahead, Blackbird.
I just wanted to thank you for having me on today. I've really enjoyed this. And yes, I always tell people, wake up, level up, and party up. Get with like-minded people and relearn. The relearning process, that's the hard thing. It's just basically understanding that the majority of what you have been taught by media, the Hollywood movies, the educational system, this is all deliberate lie. And one of the most heinous lies is the lie of omission, where all those facts that they leave out, like race realism, that IQ bell curve is a thing, the emotional quotient bell curve is a thing, the temporal quotient bell curve, the understanding of time and planning ahead and being able to read a clock. That bell curve is, real. That is the reality of race realism. And we have to realize that we've been set up to fail, just like South Africa was set up to fail. And we see where they are now. Rhodesia was set up to fail. Look at, what's going on now there in Zimbabwe, right? So we've got to put a stop to this, because this is an existential battle that we are playing for our children and our children's children. What kind of world do we want our children to grow up in? Do you want it to be in some ghetto where they're, fear for their lives. They're going to be attacked by, packs of rabid, non-whites because they are white. Are your children going to be, your daughters raped, etc.? This is the reality of these multicultural dystopias that they're forcing on us, and we have to stand up in our individual communities, our individual states, our parishes, or countries, or whatever. But we have to stand up and fight smart, and they can be defeated. They are not invincible. So I have really enjoyed this, and I hope everyone's enjoyed it, and I hope everyone has a good Sunday afternoon.